You know the problem with this shop? There's an enormous pile of crap that still hasn't been put away. Because I have nowhere to put it, this building has a tiny little storage room and no shelving. So today, we're gonna fix that. We definitely need a big shelf right here, just outside the wood shop. Good thing I put a bunch of machinery right in the way. Once that's moved, we're going to measure the space and sketch out a plan. I meant to draw a digital model of the shelves with a whole cut list and everything, but that didn't happen, so we're just going to wing it. I'm sure my lack of planning won't come back to bite me. At all. I've got a big pile of 2x6 lumber left over from fixing the floor, so we're going to use that to build these shelves. I sketched up a very rough plan, figured out all the lengths I need, and we're cross-cutting those right next to the stack of lumber. This is way more efficient than carrying things into the table saw. For making the small shelf supports, we used a cross-cut sled to move fast and keep things square. Of course, building shelves out of 2x6 would be insane, so we're going to rip everything in half to get stock that's almost the same as a 2x4. And yeah, I'm the hand tool guy, but when I have a huge stack of parts to process, I love to have a table saw. Jobs like this take minutes instead of hours. But hold on. Does that seem like a really big pile of parts? Especially since we're going to rip all of it in half? So, funny thing about that, we calculated the total number of parts and then cross-cut everything, but we forgot that we were going to rip everything in half, thus doubling the amount of parts. So we ended up with twice as many of each part as we had planned. I'm leaving this mistake in the video because I've been doing woodworking for a long time, and it's still really easy to make a simple miscalculation and have kind of a big error. It happens to everybody. It happens all the time. Don't feel too bad about it. We're going to build a second set of shelves a little later, so having some extra lumber is not a big deal. The plan here is to make several large frames like this, cover them in plywood, and then add the vertical supports. Most of the fasteners will go through these end pieces, so it makes sense to pre-drill all these parts. The drill press is quick and accurate for this kind of work, so we make one piece, test it on the assembly, and then use that piece as a jig. When I drop screws in all the holes and give them a tap, I get perfect locations to drill the next piece. Over at the bench, Brandon is using an offcut to get the correct spacing before clamping the parts down and running in the screws. As I'm making the parts, he's building the frames. We're both working, so no time gets wasted. Finally, he takes each frame and adds center supports to keep things stiff and keep the shelves flat. Now we just need to cover these frames with some kind of sheet goods. It really doesn't matter what you use, so I like to see these projects as an opportunity to use up stuff that's too good to throw away, but too crappy to ever put in a piece of furniture. This particle board is left over from the flooring, so it's free, but it's also a weird shape. So Brandon offers expert assistance while I cut it to shape. All of our scrap is too narrow for a full shelf, so we run some thin strips on the table saw and just fill in the gaps. Now, we're ready to assemble the shelves. Most shop shelving loosens up over time, so we made our frames with this overhanging corner. The uprights will slide right in like this, and the design of the shelf will keep them locked in place even as the screws loosen over time. With two uprights on the floor, we add our top and bottom shelves, measure our diagonals to make sure everything is square, and then we add our other shelves. Then we add the other two legs and secure them with two screws on the diagonal to prevent twisting. When all the uprights are in place, we cross our fingers and stand the whole thing up. Now, one of the shelves is really crooked, and we have no idea why. So we just throw a clamp on it, crank it up until it's level, and put the screws back in. It's no big deal. Now, all that's left is to carry the shelf out and set it in place. I admit, I'm very impatient with shop projects like this. They're boring and uncreative, but totally necessary. This project had its obstacles, but it was pretty quick, and we used up a bunch of materials that I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Now that these are done, I finally have a place to start organizing tools and supplies. It's a massive relief. So we're done, right? I wish. If we exit the shop and walk all the way through the main room and through the office, we get to the storeroom, which is just as tiny and dingy as it looks on camera. Oh, and there's this whatever, covering up the old window and threatening to fall at any second. Ultimately, we're going to put in some nice built-in shelving, bolted right to the wall. But before we do that, it's time for some demolition. I'm not even sure what all this stuff is. The window is boarded up from outside, but everything is broken and the window frame is badly bent. I think maybe a truck backed into this window, and instead of fixing it, the old owner just bolted plywood to the outside. Either way, we can't leave this stuff hanging over our heads. Then there's a lot of glass that needs to be removed and some old shelf parts that need to come off the wall. Then we're ready to build. There are no straight lines or right angles anywhere in this building. So we're going to snap a chalk line all the way around the wall and use that to get the first shelf level and straight. Here's the problem. This building is made of hollow clay bricks. They have really thin walls and won't hold a fastener. The only place you can drive a screw is the mortar joints. And we really have to plan where each shelf goes. So I get this first piece right up under the chalk line, drill into the mortar, add a masonry screw, make sure it's level, drill again, and add the second screw. Now that I've got one level support, we can just follow that all the way around the room. Then we screw a piece to the front of our frame and we're ready to add the shelf. Another scrap of particle board and the bottom shelf is done. With one shelf complete, it's easy to just measure up and find the position for the next shelf. The framing is simple, but the wall gets more uneven the higher up you go, and putting the plywood on top is really tricky. I need to fit that plywood to this wavy wall, so I'm going to use a compass to scribe that wall line right onto my shelf. Cut the line on the bandsaw and fit that shelf in place. The third shelf is even easier, and we finish off by adding a center support. This way, the shelves will stay straight, even as I inevitably load them up with a bunch of heavy crap. Adding shelves to even a small room can double or triple your storage. Before we started, the stuff you see on screen was filling up the whole storeroom. Now we can put all of this stuff away, and the shelves aren't nearly full. People think I'm kidding when I say I'm bad at carpentry, but it's the truth. I really specialize in furniture, and when it comes to anything bigger, I get a little intimidated. I mean, I don't know how to do that stuff because I haven't had much practice. Even a set of shelves is a big project for me. But working outside of your comfort zone, well, obviously, that's how you get better at stuff like this. And now that the shelves are done, I feel like, oh, I could build more big shelving pretty easily. The experience of doing it once took a lot of the anxiety out of it. And this is just a natural part of the progression of me being in a big commercial space like this. If I'm going to have a more professional shop in a big freestanding building, I'm going to have to level up my skills. I mean, I'm not working out of my basement anymore, so I have to grow. And that's totally fine as things get more professional around here. Now, you might have noticed these big acoustic panels behind me, and the sound is less echoey than it was a couple weeks ago. That's because we just spent a whole week making and hanging these sound-absorbing panels. And next week, we're going to have a complete video on how to design, prototype, mass produce, and hang these. It was an enormous project. We learned a ton. We have a lot that we're going to share with you, and that's going to be ready in 1 week, unless you're a patron, and then you get to see it 4 days early. My patrons get to see all of my videos early. They get exclusive videos that nobody else gets to see. They get all of my plans for free and a bunch of other rewards. If you'd like to be one of the people who makes these videos possible and makes it possible for me to not read ads or do sponsored videos, go on over to patreon.com/Rex Krueger and check out all the rewards we've got. We'll be back next week with this video on how to make these sound panels for your shop or recording studio or podcasting studio. Even if you're not a woodworker, you might need to know how to make these. Stay tuned.